Hey guys, Robbie here from CrossFit South Bend. Today we are going to try to answer the question, how much food should you eat? So, a couple things to say right up front. This is so hyper contextual. It's so contextual to, is a person someone who's 400 pounds who's trying to stop being diabetic and they're primarily sedentary versus a high level CrossFit Games athlete? It's going to be super contextual. But what we're going to try to lay out in this video is just base guidelines. Typically what we'll say to you here is if these base things aren't even in place, then you shouldn't even be worried about things like keto and, a whole bunch of different macro splits. Those can be tremendously useful in certain contexts, but you need this first base level to even venture into those areas. So first I'm going to talk about kind of a visual method for measuring your food, and then I'll talk about more specific amounts that can be helpful. So a visual method that different folks like Precision Nutrition or the Whole30 mention is using your hand. So for protein, they typically say about a palm size. Why is that good? Well, because to the extent someone's palm is smaller, that's going to mean a smaller chunk of protein. And if their palm is a lot bigger, that's going to be a bigger chunk of protein, which should correspond to their body size. You put that palm-sized protein on your plate, and then you fill the rest of the plate with vegetables. That's a pretty good start. Again, hyper-contextual, can change things up, but that's a good place to start. In terms of fats at each meal, if you are going to do oils, about a thumb size, that's going to correspond to roughly a tablespoon of fat to either cook with your veggies or to cook with your meat or to drizzle over your salad. And then for things like fruit, typically like one handful, like an apple or blueberries, and same thing with nuts and seeds. So that isn't perfect, that isn't the end all be all, that isn't the only thing to pay attention to, but that's a really good place to start. If you're not having meals with quality protein, veggies, and healthy fat as your foundation, and maybe some, fruits, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices as extra pieces, then you don't need to be worried about all this other crazy stuff. You don't need to be worried about Weight Watchers points. You don't need to worry about calories. You don't need to worry about all these different macro splits. Okay, so that's a good visual way to help, but sometimes people ask, what about actual amounts? Can we give you guys some amounts? So here are some amounts that I like to tell people. So for protein, in general, if we're talking about a slab of protein like a fillet of salmon or a chicken breast or a steak or something like that, we're talking somewhere between a quarter pound and a half pound. So 4 ounces to 8 ounces. Sure, if someone's working out more, it can go all the way up to 12 ounces or even 16 ounces. But for most people, men and women, somewhere between 4 to 8 ounces at a meal is going to be a really good place to start. Vegetables. So non-starchy vegetables, I like that rule of basically filling the rest of your plate. I wouldn't restrict non-starchy vegetables. In fact, if anything, I would say a bare minimum that we like is 1 non-starchy vegetable per meal. So meaning like one thing like kale or cucumber or broccoli or cabbage at each meal. And then in terms of your starchy vegetables, things like white potatoes, sweet potatoes, plantains, butternut squash, somewhere between 50 and 150 grams is a good place to start people off. How do you figure out what that is? Well, a regular size white potato or sweet potato is going to be somewhere around 40 to 50 grams. So that's a good place to start. And then healthy fats, again, hyper contextual, going to depend on who you are, but I would say somewhere in the realm of 1 to 2 tablespoons per meal, where you're either cooking your meat with that or cooking your veggies or drizzling some oil on your salad. That usually does the trick. So hopefully that gives you a sense of some good amounts to have with your meal. Again, we think of it in terms of what we sometimes refer to as the 20-mile march. We want to get people in this we want to get them to begin with this way of eating first, where they even have these quantities that we just mentioned in place, and then we can move on to things like keto or more advanced macros and so on and so forth. So practical takeaways from this video, guys. Number 1, above all else, as we've said in every other single video we've ever done, food quality first and foremost. Got that in place? Okay, well, let's start worrying about that food quantity. That's all the stuff I talked about today. So 4 to 8 ounces of protein at a meal, roughly palm size. Rest of your plate with veggies, 1 non-starchy vegetable at a meal, and 50 to 150 grams of starchy vegetables per day, and then 1 to 2 tablespoons of healthy fat at each meal. All right, guys, hopefully that gives you some direction. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.